They called it nothing more than scrap metal, a ghost ship rotting at the edge of Baltimore's harbor. So, why did a broke veteran named Michael Harris spend his last paycheck to claim it? What he and his loyal German shepherd, Rex, uncovered inside that rusting hull wasn't treasure or gold. It was a secret powerful enough to shake a nation. And to protect it, Michael would have to outsmart enemies from the shadows, using every skill he learned on the battlefield. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and if you believe in the courage of veterans and their K9 partners, hit subscribe for more stories of loyalty and redemption. A pale morning mist clung to Baltimore's harbor, softening the hard lines of cranes and warehouses into faded silhouettes. The water lapped lazily against the piers, carrying with it the smell of salt, diesel, and rust. For most people, it was a place of endings, where old ships came to die. For Michael Harris, it was something else. It was a mirror of his own life, scarred, weary, but still afloat. Michael Harris was 46 years old, though the years sat heavier on him than the number suggested. Broad-shouldered from a life of hauling crates and rigging ropes, he carried himself like a man still marching under unseen orders. His dark hair, peppered with early gray, was trimmed close out of habit from his Navy days. Lines framed his eyes, not just from age, but from sleepless nights and memories of things most men never had to see. Those eyes, a deep storm gray, often wandered toward the horizon as though some piece of him still belonged to the sea. He had survived battles overseas, but the harder war had been returning home to a world that had no use for broken sailors. His only true companion was Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat of black and tan. Rex's ears stood like radar dishes, always tuned to trouble, but his eyes carried the warmth of a creature who would follow his master into fire. When they walked, Rex had a habit of keeping half a step ahead, as if forever ready to shield Michael from whatever came. The dog was lean, muscled, and carried the quiet discipline of an old soldier's partner. He had been trained once, before Michael adopted him from a rescue shelter. And though no one knew exactly where he came from, Michael recognized the signs. Rex had been someone's working dog, perhaps military, perhaps police. Now, he was Michael's shadow. That morning, Michael's boots echoed on the pier as he finished a shift hauling crates for minimum pay. His hands were cracked from rope burns, his back ached, and the few bills in his pocket felt lighter than the effort he had spent earning them. He scratched Rex behind the ears, his voice low and rough. "That's another day done, boy. Another day we didn't sink." Rex wagged his tail once, solemn as always, then turned his head sharply toward the far side of the harbor. Michael followed the dog's gaze. There, across the mist, loomed a hulk of iron. The Liberty Dawn. A cargo ship 300 feet long, forgotten and unloved. Her hull was streaked with rust the color of dried blood, her windows dark and blind. She had been moored in Slip 47 for years, a ghost ship no one wanted. Seagulls nested in her railings, and even the tide seemed to treat her with caution. Yet, as Michael studied her lines, something stirred in him. Despite the wounds of neglect, the ship sat level in the water. Her bones were still strong. Like him, she had been abandoned, but not broken. "Still holding on, huh?" he muttered under his breath. Rex growled softly as if in agreement. Michael wasn't the only one staring at her. Carl Simmons, a dockhand with shoulders as wide as barrels, ambled over with his usual smirk. Carl was in his 50s, bald as an egg, with a laugh that usually came at someone else's expense. "Don't tell me you're admiring that rust bucket, Harris. That thing's worth less than the seagull crap on it." Michael offered him a dry look. He'd worked alongside Carl for years, tolerating the man's sarcasm because everyone did. "Some things aren't what they seem." Carl chuckled, slapping his knee. Sure, and maybe my old bicycle's a Rolls Royce if you squint hard enough." He shuffled off, leaving behind the scent of cheap tobacco. But the thought had already taken root. That evening, back in his cramped apartment, Michael unfolded the local paper. Buried between advertisements for used furniture and job listings, one notice caught his eye. Abandoned vessel, Liberty Dawn, free to qualified applicant willing to assume towing and disposal costs. Contact Harbor Authority. Michael read the line 3 times. Free. The word was a trap, surely. Nothing in life was free. But his old instincts whispered to him, "Look closer." He imagined the vessel not as she was, but as she could be. Scrap metal to sell, or maybe even something more. The next morning, Michael walked into the Harbor Authority office, Rex trotting at his side. Behind the counter sat Leonard Rodriguez, a thin man with drooping mustache and the constant expression of someone whose coffee had gone cold. Leonard had worked the harbor desk for decades and seemed permanently unimpressed by the world. His shirt was always half untucked, his tie loosened, and his eyes flickered with the weary suspicion of a man who had seen too many fools chase bad ideas. "I'm here about the Liberty Dawn," Michael said. Leonard looked up, eyebrows rising just enough to show surprise. "You're the first in 6 months. You know what you're getting into?" "I know ships," Michael replied simply. Rodriguez slid a form across the counter. "She's yours if you can tow her and deal with disposal. Filing fees $300. Michael's stomach nodded. $300, his entire paycheck, meant for rent, utilities, food. He looked down at Rex, who stood with ears alert, eyes steady, as though sensing his master's hesitation. Michael felt the weight of his navy ring pressing against his palm, a token he carried like a talisman. He remembered a night years ago, a storm battering his destroyer in the Atlantic, lightning flashing on steel, men clinging to the deck. He had shouted commands into the roar of wind, refusing to let fear sink them. They had made it through because someone believed the ship could hold. Maybe this was no different. "Can I see her?" he asked. Slip 47 was quiet, save for the groan of ropes straining against tides. The Liberty Dawn loomed larger with each step, her size dwarfing the nearby fishing boats. Her superstructure was scarred, her paint eaten away. Yet Michael saw strength in her stance. He ran a calloused hand along her hull, feeling the cold steel beneath the rust. Rex paced beside him, tail rigid, occasionally sniffing at the seams of the ship, as if he too sensed hidden life within. Michael whispered, "What do you think, Sarah?" His late wife's name slipped from his lips before he could stop it. Sarah had been tall and slender, with auburn hair and a laugh that filled every corner of their old house. Cancer had taken her 18 months ago, and since then the world had felt smaller, but she had always believed in him, seen possibility where others saw only dead ends. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice. "Michael, you build things. You don't walk away from them." He straightened. This wasn't just a rusted ship. It was a chance, fragile, dangerous, but a chance nonetheless. Back in the office, he laid 3 crumpled hundreds on the counter. Leonard studied him, mustache twitching. "You sure about this?" She could be nothing but headaches. Michael's gaze didn't waver. "I've handled worse." Leonard signed the papers with a shrug, handing over a ring of keys that looked older than Rex. "Congratulations. You're now the proud owner of Baltimore's biggest piece of scrap." Michael slipped the keys into his pocket, next to the navy ring and Sarah's memory. For the first time in months, his chest felt lighter. That evening, he led Rex back to slip 47. The ship waited, silent, almost expectant. Michael climbed the gangway, each step groaning under his boots, until he stood on the deck. The smell of salt, rust, and old oil filled his lungs. Beneath the decay, he felt it, the heartbeat of something not yet finished. Rex stood at his side, ears high, as though guarding the threshold of a new life. Michael spoke softly, almost a vow. "All right, girl, let's see what secrets you're hiding." And with that, man and dog stepped into the shadow of the Liberty Dawn, unaware that their decision would awaken ghosts long buried and secrets worth far more than rust and steel. The first day aboard the Liberty Dawn felt less like ownership and more like trespassing. Michael Harris walked her decks cautiously, his boots ringing on steel, the echoes swallowed by silence. The ship was immense, a labyrinth of rust and shadows. The smell of oil and salt clung to every surface, as if time itself had seeped into the seams. Rex padded at his side, ears flicking at each groan of metal, his nose working overtime to catalog scents of gulls, mold, and something older, something human. Michael carried only a flashlight, a crowbar, and his stubborn resolve. He started with the main deck, clearing broken glass and rotted ropes into piles, his muscles straining, but his mind almost grateful for the physical work. The labor reminded him of service days when sweat and grit gave clarity. Rex trotted ahead, pausing often, tail straight, as if guiding him through the wreckage. In the crew's mess hall, remnants of another life sat waiting. Mugs still lined the shelves, their enamel chipped. A deck of cards lay scattered across a table, yellowed with age. Michael picked one up, ace of spades, and smiled grimly. "Luck's a fickle thing, huh?" he muttered. Rex only huffed and moved on. The ship was alive with clues. In the captain's quarters, a dusty portrait of the Liberty Dawn in her prime leaned crooked on the wall. Beneath it, Michael found a brass compass, its glass cracked but needles still trembling faintly. He pocketed it, feeling an odd pull, as if the object carried weight beyond its metal. Rex suddenly barked, short, sharp, alert. Michael spun, flashlight beams slicing the dimness. The dog stood near a section of bulkhead, nose pressed against the floor, paw scraping insistently. The steel there rang hollow under Michael's boots. Heart tightening, he crouched, running fingers across the seams. The panel looked ordinary, but his trained eyes caught the faint difference in weld lines. Whoever had sealed it hadn't meant for casual discovery. "Good boy," Michael whispered, ruffling Rex's ears. His dog's body trembled with excitement, tail beating the air. Michael wedged the crowbar into the seam. It took several tries and sweat dripping into his eyes before the panel gave way, with a screech that echoed through the corridor. Behind it yawned a dark cavity, a crawl space just wide enough for a man willing to ignore the claustrophobia pressing in. Michael slid inside, flashlight beam cutting through dust motes. Rex whined from outside, nails clicking anxiously on steel. "Stay," Michael ordered gently, though his own pulse hammered in his ears. The crawl space angled downward, ending in a hatch crusted with grime. The handle turned stiffly, but when it finally opened, Michael found himself staring into a hidden compartment, no larger than a storage closet. There, on a steel shelf, sat an old iron box, edges reinforced, lock long since rusted shut. Michael hefted it onto his lap, coughing as dust billowed. The box was surprisingly heavy. He smashed the lock with his crowbar until it cracked open. Inside lay a collection of artifacts frozen in time. A folded map, brittle with age, a leather-bound journal, and packets of documents wrapped in wax paper to protect them from damp. The smell was old paper and secrets. Michael's fingers trembled as he opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of script drilled into naval officers. The first pages recorded mundane details, coordinates, weather, crew morale. But further in, the words shifted, laced with tension. October 1983. Orders received from Norfolk Station. Cargo reclassified. Security level raised. Crew instructed to silence. Strange men aboard. God help us. Michael turned the pages faster. References repeated. Classified cargo, sealed orders, Cold War protocols. One entry made him pause. "We carry not freight, but ghosts. One slip, and the world changes." His breath caught. The Liberty Dawn hadn't been a simple cargo vessel. She had been entangled in the shadow games of espionage. The folded map revealed a route not listed in any standard manifest, northeast toward the Chesapeake Bay Islands, a detour that suggested secrecy, not commerce. Red ink circled coordinates near Tangier Sound, annotated with the phrase "drop point." Michael pressed his lips into a hard line. Memories stirred, tense patrols, coded messages, whispers of missions no one admitted happened. He had thought the world left behind in the Navy. Yet here it was, waiting for him in the belly of a forgotten ship. Among the wax-sealed papers, he found typed sheets stamped with faded red ink, "Top Secret." They bore signatures of officers long dead, references to intelligence exchanges, and the chilling phrase "Hang Hoa Tuyet," matte typed in Vietnamese, then underlined. Michael frowned. During his deployments, he had heard of such phrases. Coded language meant to blur meaning. It suggested the ship had carried something beyond weapons or machinery, something tied to the clandestine web of East and West. He leaned back against the steel, chest tight. Why hide all this? Why abandon the ship without stripping it clean? The thought chilled him. Perhaps someone had meant for the Liberty Dawn to vanish into obscurity, its secrets rusting with it. Yet fate, or desperation, had put it into his hands. When Michael crawled back out, Rex wagged his tail anxiously and pressed against his legs, whining softly. Michael ruffled his fur, voice low. "Easy, boy. We just stumbled on something bigger than us both." He looked across the empty deck, shadows stretching long in the late light. For the first time in years, a spark flickered in his chest. Not hope exactly, but purpose. As evening fell, he carried the box back to his apartment. He laid the contents out carefully on his worn kitchen table. His apartment, once silent and lonely, now felt charged, as if unseen eyes pressed through the walls. He read the journal again, absorbing every detail, his soldier's mind piecing together patterns. Secret cargo, coded orders, altered routes. The Liberty Dawn had not merely carried freight, she had carried a Cold War secret worth hiding. Exhaustion eventually claimed him, but before he slept, he placed Rex's blanket near the table, the dog curling protectively beside the iron box. Michael's last thought was not of fear, but of Sarah's voice, whispering from memory, "Michael, sometimes the world gives you one last mission. Don't turn away from it." The Liberty Dawn, once just rust and steel, had become something else entirely, and Michael Harris, weary veteran, found himself once again standing at the edge of duty. The days following Michael's discovery on the Liberty Dawn passed in uneasy silence. He tried to live as if nothing had changed, hauling crates on the docks by day, spending his evenings combing through the weather journal and coded maps on his kitchen table. Yet beneath the surface, tension coiled tighter with each sunrise. Rex sensed it too. The German shepherd, once content to nap near the door, had become restless, his ears pricking at the faintest sound outside the apartment, his growls low and sharp at shadows crossing the street. Michael's instincts, sharpened by decades of service, told him the change wasn't in his head. On the third morning, while walking Rex along the pier before his shift, he caught sight of a figure leaning against a lamppost, too still, too watchful. The man wore a long navy coat and a baseball cap pulled low. But even from a distance, Michael could see the squared stance of someone trained to hold ground. His beard was trimmed close, his posture too alert for a simple dock laborer waiting for work. When Michael turned suddenly, pretending to tug Rex's leash, the man flicked his eyes away with practiced speed. Later that afternoon, as Michael left the port office, 2 other men trailed him a half-block behind. One was tall, thin, with a hawk-like nose and clean-shaven jaw. The other shorter and stockier, with thick black hair cropped close, his neck corded with muscle. They wore plain clothes, but their boots were military issue, scuffed but durable, and their gazes scanned alleys with mechanical precision. Mercenaries, Michael realized, or worse, ex-soldiers working freelance. He had seen the type in war zones, men who carried discipline like armor, but loyalty only to the highest bidder. At the harbor's edge, Michael paused at a food cart run by an old acquaintance, Doris Miller. Doris was in her 60s, a stout woman with sun-browned skin and gray hair tied into a bun. She had run her coffee and pretzel stand near the docks for decades, her laughter as briny as the sea air. Doris handed Michael his usual black coffee with a knowing smile. "You look tighter than a rope in storm weather, Harris. Something on your mind?" Michael forced a small smile, though his eyes flicked over her shoulder, noting the 2 men pretending to browse a newspaper stand. "Just long hours," he replied, slipping $1 onto her counter. Rex sat at his side, staring daggers at the strangers across the street. Doris's sharp eyes followed his glance. She snorted. "Doc's always been full of rats. Just be sure you're not the one they're sniffing at." Her words lingered as he walked away. Michael knew better than to dismiss instincts. He had survived ambushes because he listened to the gut feeling that danger lurked, even when logic said otherwise. And now, that same feeling gnawed at him. The Liberty Dawn's secrets were no longer his alone. That night, in his apartment, Michael spread the documents. Again, Rex lying stiff at his feet, tail twitching whenever a car rolled past outside. Michael reread the journal entries, searching for something. Any clue why the ship had been abandoned, why it mattered now. His mind sharpened with the old rhythm of mission planning: gather intelligence, assess threats, prepare defenses. He carefully placed the journal and maps into a waterproof satchel, then stored them in a vent behind his dresser, a habit left from barracks days when contraband had to be hidden from inspections. If someone came, they would not find the heart of it easily. The next evening, as he returned from the pier, a man stepped out from the shadows near his building's entrance. He was broad, in his late 40s, with a shaved head and scar tracing from temple to jaw. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and his stance radiated menace. His leather jacket hung open, revealing not a weapon, but the bulge of someone unafraid to carry one. He spoke in a voice rough with cigarettes. "Harris, we need to talk." Michael stopped 3 paces away, Rex immediately bristling, teeth bared in a low growl. "I don't recall giving my name," Michael replied evenly. The man smiled without warmth. "You don't have to. We know who you are. Navy vet, 2 tours in the Gulf, 1 in the Atlantic. You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Michael's face remained impassive, though his pulse hammered. "All I've got is a rusted ship and a dog with sharp teeth." The man's smile widened, but his eyes stayed dead. "Careful. Men who find things they shouldn't don't last long." With that, he melted back into the alley, leaving behind only the echo of his boots and the tension of an unspoken threat. Inside, Michael locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. His hands trembled only slightly as he stroked Rex's head. "We're in it now, boy." He thought of Sarah again, of her steady belief that he was more than the sum of his scars. One last mission, her memory whispered. He had promised himself never to be dragged back into shadows, yet the shadows had come for him. The following days confirmed it. He spotted the same faces lingering at the docks, trailing him by car when he took Rex on longer walks, loitering at bars near the harbor. They never approached directly, but their presence pressed on him like a weight. He adapted, as he always had. He varied his routes home, doubled back unexpectedly, noted every escape route from his apartment to the street. He even visited Doris's stand at odd hours, partly for the coffee, partly to use her spot as a vantage point. Doris teased him for his jumpiness, but her eyes softened with unspoken understanding. She had seen enough sailors return broken to know when one was circling a storm. One evening, Michael sat on the deck of the Liberty Dawn, staring out at the black water shimmering under dock lights. Rex lay at his feet, ears pricked, eyes scanning. The darkness. The ship groaned and shifted with the tide, as if alive, whispering secrets only he and Rex could hear. Michael whispered back, more to himself than the dog. "They want what's hidden here, but they'll have to come through us first." The Liberty Dawn was no longer just a rusting hulk. It was bait, a battlefield waiting to be claimed, and Michael Harris, though weary of wars, understood that some battles choose you. The harbor lay under a veil of fog that evening, thick and low, muffling the clang of chains and the distant horns of passing freighters. Michael Harris sat on the deck of the Liberty Dawn, his back against the corroded rail, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows beyond the pier. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his paws, but ears alert, the faint growl vibrating in his throat, betraying that he, too, sensed the weight of the coming storm. Michael had spent the last 2 nights preparing. His Navy training had resurfaced like muscle memory, the art of expecting the unexpected. He rigged thin wires across the main gangway, strung to a bell hidden under a tarp, primitive but reliable. He placed smoke flares at strategic corners, angled so their red and green glare would be visible across the bay. He even scavenged an old air horn from the supply closet, rewiring it to a pressure plate beneath the deck hatch. It was a sailor's version of a battlefield, quiet, improvised, but enough to buy precious minutes. As dusk deepened, Michael poured himself black coffee from a dented thermos, the bitter taste grounding him. His mind drifted to Sarah for a moment. The memory of her tall, graceful figure standing in their kitchen years ago, auburn hair falling over her shoulders as she teased him for taking his coffee too strong. She had always told him, "You plan for storms, Michael, but don't let them own you." Tonight, her voice steadied him. Around 10, footsteps whispered across the dock. Michael's jaw tightened. He motioned to Rex, who rose silently, hackles raised, body taut with anticipation. 3 figures materialized from the mist, moving low and fast. They weren't dockhands coming late to work. Their movements were coordinated, one scanning ahead, one trailing wide, the third covering the flank. They wore dark clothing, gloves, and balaclavas that masked all but their eyes. The way they carried themselves spoke of training, of men who had once served under orders and now operated for a price. Michael held his breath, waiting. The first man reached the gangway and stepped onto the deck. The wire sang. A bell clattered under the tarp, loud in the night. Instantly, Rex exploded into barking, the sound sharp and furious, echoing across the harbor. The intruder froze a half-second too long. Michael slammed his boot against the deck plate. The air horn shrieked from beneath, startling the men into jerky panic. "Move!" the leader hissed, his voice muffled. They surged forward, smoke flares ignited, pouring green and crimson haze across the deck. The night lit up like an emergency beacon. Michael pulled the old handheld radio from his belt, one he had borrowed off a sympathetic dock officer earlier. His voice was calm, clipped. "Harbor Security, this is Harris. Unauthorized boarding in progress. Location slip 47. Liberty Dawn. Visual marker deployed." Static answered first, then a woman's voice, steady and professional. "Copy that, Harris. Patrol en route. Maintain position." The intruders realized too late that they had walked into a trap. One tried to vault over the railing, but smoke blinded him, and Rex lunged, teeth snapping shut on the man's sleeve. The attacker cursed, swinging wildly, but Rex held fast, dragging him down with a snarl that reverberated in Michael's chest. The other two bolted toward the stern, their silhouettes distorted in the colored haze. From across the bay came the sudden wail of a siren. Blue lights flickered faintly through the fog. The patrol boat was closing in fast, drawn to the flares burning like distress signals against the night sky. Michael kept low, crowbar in hand, though he prayed he wouldn't have to use it. He tracked the men's movement, his heart pounding not with fear, but with focus. The instincts of a soldier on watch never faded. He knew where they would run, where panic would drive them. The stocky intruder reached the far ladder first, boots clanging. As he scrambled down, a spotlight cut through the mist, blinding him. "Harbor Police! Stay where you are!" The man froze mid-step. The other cursed and tried to disappear into the shadows, but armed officers were already on the gangway, weapons drawn. The man pinned by Rex struggled until an officer pulled the dog back. Rex's muzzle was damp with sweat and torn fabric, his body still trembling with adrenaline. Michael gripped his collar, murmuring, "Easy, boy, easy." Rex's amber eyes blazed, but he obeyed, chest heaving as he sat pressed against Michael's leg. The intruders were shoved face down, cuffed, and hauled toward the patrol boat. One turned his masked head and spat onto the deck, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over, Harris. You've no idea what you've stepped into." His eyes were pale gray, burning with rage, but Michael only stared back, expression granite. A tall officer approached then, introducing himself as Lieutenant Charles Denton. Denton was in his late 30s, with close-cropped blonde hair and a square jaw that looked carved from stone. His uniform was immaculate even in the chaos, his tone clipped but respectful. "Mr. Harris, we received your report just in time. Your flares gave us a beacon through the fog. Without them, we might have missed the dock." Michael nodded. "I had a feeling they'd come." Denton's sharp eyes studied him a moment. "You've got experience." "Once," Michael answered simply. The officer looked at Rex, who still sat stiffly by Michael's side, ears erect, eyes locked on the arrested men. Denton gave a faint smile. "And a good partner, I see." Michael stroked Rex's head, feeling the tremor beneath the dog's skin begin to ease. "The best I've ever had." As the police escorted the intruders away, Michael's gaze drifted across the Liberty Dawn's deck, still hazy with colored smoke. He exhaled slowly, chest heavy with the knowledge that tonight was only the beginning. The ship's secrets had already drawn blood, but now he had proof, and the law on record. He wasn't just a man clutching wild stories. He had evidence that someone wanted silenced. The fog swallowed the patrol boat as it departed, but the glow of its lights lingered in Michael's mind. For the first time since he'd stepped aboard the Liberty Dawn, he didn't feel entirely alone. The night's chaos still clung to the Liberty Dawn, like smoke after a fire. Michael Harris leaned against the rusted railing, his breath steady, but his mind sharp, replaying every step of the ambush and the sound of Rex's furious bark. Now, with the intruders hauled away and the deck washed in eerie silence, Michael knew the time had come to push deeper. The ship was no longer just a derelict. It was evidence, and perhaps a graveyard of truths left to rot. Lieutenant Charles Denton had stayed behind with a small team. The tall officer's square jaw was set in a grim line, his pale blue eyes scanning every shadow as though expecting another ambush. At 38, Denton carried himself with the weight of years in uniform, though unlike Michael's war-weary posture, his was polished, precise. He had grown up the son of a Baltimore firefighter who had died in a warehouse blaze, and the tragedy had carved into him a sense of duty as unyielding as steel. He was known on the force for his clipped speech and strict fairness, a man who believed rules kept chaos at bay. Rex patted at Michael's side as they descended into the belly of the Liberty Dawn. The German Shepherd was still taut with energy, nails tapping on the steel stairs, tail stiff, ears swiveling at every creak of the ship's bones. His amber eyes glowed in the beam of Denton's flashlight, full of a fierce readiness. They entered the engine room, its machinery looming like sleeping giants in the gloom. Rust streaked the walls, pipes dripped with condensation, and the air carried a heavy tang of oil. Michael's flashlight beam swept across the floor until it landed on the spot Rex had pawed at days before. The weld lines were wrong, slightly raised, as though sealed in haste. Rex sniffed again, paw scratching insistently at the seam, growling low. Denton crouched, running a gloved hand over the spot. "This doesn't look standard. You sure about this?" Michael knelt beside him, crowbar in hand. "I've crawled enough ships to know a patch job when I see one. Somebody didn't want this opened." His voice was steady, but inside his chest a storm brewed. He remembered Sarah's words about storms not owning him. Tonight, he would not flinch. With Denton's men forming a perimeter, Michael wedged the crowbar under the edge. Sparks flew as the metal groaned, then tore free with a shriek. Behind it lay a recessed compartment, a cavity swallowed by darkness. Michael's light caught the outline of a steel safe, its surface mottled with rust, but unmistakably military issue, thick, boxy, built to endure. "Looks like you were right," Denton said, voice low. He motioned to one of his men, Officer Ramirez, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and warm brown eyes that softened his otherwise imposing build. Ramirez produced a portable grinder from his kit. Sparks rained as he cut into the lock. Rex barked once, ears pinned, uneasy at the noise. Michael knelt beside him, murmuring calm reassurance, feeling the dog's trembling body ease beneath his hand. After long minutes, the lock yielded. The door creaked open, revealing bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Michael reached in and carefully pulled out the contents. Reels of microfilm sealed in canisters, folders stamped with faded red ink, and several leather-bound ledgers. The air that escaped was dry and stale, like opening a coffin. Denton leaned closer, his flashlight steady. He read the first stamped page aloud. "Operation Silent Tide." His jaw clenched. "This is no dockyard rumor." Michael's fingers tightened around the folder as he flipped through pages of typed reports. The words chilled him. Uranium transport, covert exchange, compromised officials. Names were listed: senators, businessmen, military officers. Some long dead, others still wielding influence. The documents painted a picture of a clandestine Cold War operation, a hidden artery of corruption winding from foreign waters back into the American heart. Ramirez whistled under his breath. "Damn, this is bigger than contraband." Denton shot him a look. "Watch your tongue. This doesn't leave this room until it's cataloged." Yet his eyes betrayed the same unease Michael felt. Evidence like this had teeth. It could bite down hard on anyone who touched it. Michael set the papers on the steel bench, his voice low. This ship was never abandoned. It was buried. Somebody wanted this to rust away where no one would look. And the men who came tonight, they're trying to make sure it stays buried. Denton's eyes met his, steady and unblinking. "You understand what happens now. This isn't just a police matter anymore. It goes higher." Michael nodded. "I figured." He felt Rex press against his leg, the dog's warmth grounding him. In Rex's amber gaze, he saw no fear, only loyalty, as though the dog understood that light had pierced through years of darkness. One of Denton's younger officers, a lean man named Patrick Sloan, barely 30 with sandy blonde hair and freckles that gave him a boyish look, carefully gathered the microfilm. His hands shook slightly, betraying nerves despite his effort to appear calm. "Sir, we'll need to log this and secure transport." "Do it," Denton ordered. Then, softer, almost to himself, "And pray it doesn't vanish into some vault where no one ever sees it again." Michael heard the bitterness in his tone. Denton might be a rule-bound man, but he wasn't naive. He knew how power devoured truth. That was why Michael felt a flicker of respect for him. As they sealed the evidence, Rex wagged his tail, almost triumphant. The dog nuzzled Michael's hand, as though reminding him that not every battle was fought with fists or guns. Sometimes victory was in bringing the hidden into the light. When they emerged from the belly of the ship, the fog had thinned, and dawn's first pale streaks brushed the horizon. The Liberty Dawn stood silent, but no longer mute. Her secret had been exhumed, witnessed not only by a weary veteran and his faithful dog, but by the law itself. For Michael, the weight in his chest eased. The past no longer pressed only on his shoulders. Now, others bore witness. And for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt that perhaps storms could be weathered, not alone, but with allies who saw truth the same way he did. Baltimore stirred with a buzz Michael Harris had never expected to be part of. In the weeks that followed the discovery aboard the Liberty Dawn, the ship became the heart of conversations in bars, diners, and even church pews. The media had descended first, their cameras flashing against the rusted steel like moths to flame. Reporters hungry for the image of a weary veteran and his dog standing before a Cold War relic. Headlines spoke of secrets unearthed, of corruption once hidden. But what struck Michael most was the way people looked at him differently now. Not as just another dock worker scraping by, but as someone who had pulled truth from the deep. The U.S. Navy confirmed the authenticity of the files. A gray-haired admiral, Richard Malone, appeared at a press conference, his uniform heavy with medals. Malone was tall, gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes that hinted at battles fought not only at sea but in bureaucratic corridors. He spoke gravely, acknowledging that Operation Silent Tide had existed, that uranium had been moved in secrecy, and that the Liberty Dawn had indeed been a pawn in a dangerous chess game decades earlier. For Malone, who had lost a brother to a cover-up during the same era, the admission was more than professional. It was personal. For Michael, watching on a small television in Doris Miller's food stand, the moment felt surreal. Doris, with her ever-practical tone, handed him a pretzel and said, "Well, Harris, looks like the whole damn city owes you a round." He only nodded, scratching Rex's head, as the dog lapped at a bowl of water. The weight of being believed after so long in silence eased something inside him. It wasn't long before city officials made their move. Mayor Elaine Carver, a woman in her early 50s with dark skin, short-cropped silver hair, and a commanding presence shaped by years in community activism, called Michael into her office. Her voice was warm but decisive, her handshake firm. "Mr. Harris, your ship has become more than a case file. It's a symbol, and symbols can either rot or inspire. We'd like to see the Liberty Dawn restored, not destroyed." She laid out the plan. With funding from the city and support from the Navy's historical division, the ship would be transformed into a workshop for repairing local boats and a living museum dedicated to Cold War naval history. But it wouldn't be officials who gave it life. It would be the people of Baltimore. Work began almost immediately. Dock workers who had once laughed at Michael's purchase now offered tools and labor. Veterans from every branch came forward, their stories stitched into the steel as they sanded, welded, and painted. Young men and women from the local community college volunteered on weekends, scrubbing decks until the ship shone faintly beneath its scars. Children arrived with brushes too big for their hands, giggling as they splashed paint in streaks of navy blue. One man, a retired welder named Hank Donnelly, became a fixture on the deck. Hank was 65, thick-set, with a shock of white hair and forearms corded with old strength. He had once worked at Bethlehem Steel before the mills shut down, and losing that job had left him bitter for years. But as he welded patches on the Liberty Dawn, his face softened, pride returning with each spark. "Feels good to build again," he told Michael one afternoon, sweat dripping from his brow. Even Doris showed up, carrying trays of sandwiches and coffee for volunteers, scolding anyone who tried to work without eating. "Can't fix a ship on an empty stomach," she declared, earning laughs that rang across the pier. Through it all, Rex became the Liberty Dawn's guardian spirit. The dog patrolled the deck as though he'd been born to it, tail high, barking at gulls that dared to swoop too close. Children adored him, lining up to toss him scraps or pat his sable coat. Journalists captured endless photos of Rex standing proudly beside Michael, amber eyes blazing with loyalty. On the morning of the grand reopening, sunlight spilled golden across the harbor. The Liberty Dawn gleamed, her hull patched and painted, her decks alive with banners and flags. Crowds gathered, dock workers in their oil-stained overalls, veterans in faded caps bearing their unit insignias, families with children clutching tiny American flags. Michael stood on the main deck in a clean shirt for once, though his boots remained scuffed as ever. Rex sat beside him, tail wagging, chest puffed as though he understood the gravity of the day. Mayor Carver gave a speech about resilience and community. Admiral Malone spoke of honoring those who had served in silence, and then the ribbon was cut, cheers erupting as the Liberty Dawn was declared both workshop and museum. But for Michael, the moment came not from speeches but from watching the people stream aboard. Children laughed as they explored the narrow corridors. Elders traced their fingers over plaques describing Cold War missions, and young apprentices rolled up their sleeves to start on the day's first repairs. Michael knelt beside Rex, rubbing the dog's ears as the noise of joy washed over them. His voice was low, meant only for his companion. "We did it, boy, but not alone. This time, the whole harbor stood with us." Rex barked once, sharp and bright, as though answering, and as the sun climbed higher, gilding the ship's steel with light, Michael felt something settle inside him. The Liberty Dawn was no longer a grave of secrets. She was alive again, a beacon not of war or deceit, but of community, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a man, his dog, and the people who chose to build rather than bury. Though the Liberty Dawn was born in secrecy and rust, she rose again through the hands of a community that refused to let her story sink. Michael Harris, once a forgotten veteran, with nothing but a loyal dog and a weary heart, found not only truth, but belonging. Rex stood guard through it all, reminding everyone that loyalty and courage often come on four legs with a wagging tail. This story is more than about ships or shadows of the past. It's about what happens when broken things are given a second chance. Just as steel can be reforged, so can lives. Just as a ship once meant for silence became a beacon of hope, so can each of us carry light into the places around us. Perhaps that is the miracle God places before us. Not thunderbolts or grand spectacles, but neighbors who show up with paint and bread, a faithful dog who refuses to leave our side, and the courage to keep walking when storms surround us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories of faith and redemption, and may God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and new beginnings.